call the April 18th, 2024 City of Brentwood Architectural Review Board meeting to order. Calling the roll, Carl Carlin.
Here.
Foreman, here. Paul Turner, not present. All right, I just lost my agenda. First item of business is meeting minutes. All right, approval of meeting minutes for March 21st, 2024.
No questions.
Approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have no old business, and our only new business, moving on to item 5 on the agenda, is our presentation and discussion with H3 Studio. So, do we have anyone online?
Well, thank you. My name is Tim Bryhan, H3 Studio. I know both of you gentlemen saw most of this information last week at the Planning and Zoning Commission, but for the purpose of the recording, we'll quickly go through the presentation. But the purpose of this is to provide a project overview and existing conditions summary for the architectural design guidelines project, and then get feedback from the both of you with a particular focus tonight, given the ARB's role on residential development. So again, the objective of the project is to develop both residential and commercial design guidelines to provide consistent direction to you all as the ARB, to provide potentially direction to planning and zoning, and really also look at how different projects are reviewed by you, by planning and zoning, by city staff, to kind of clarify that process and make sure that the appropriate appointed officials and city staff see these projects as they come through. This project is being developed through a pretty intensive community engagement process. There's going to be a lot of continued meetings with the various boards and commissions, meeting with the steering committee, which you both serve on, residential and commercial focus groups, and then 2 public open houses during the course of the project. So when we talk about the existing conditions, and it's obviously very important when developing design guidelines to kind of do a character analysis of the city of Brentwood. Obviously, if we move on to the next slide, as you know, the city is, the development of the city is highly dictated by its natural environment, its topography, the Deer Creek and the floodplains. Onto the next slide, you can see in this figure ground map of Brentwood, really the contrast between the residential areas, which are the very light areas, and the commercial and particularly the industrial areas, which are very dark, because this represents impervious surface as we sort of flip through streets and roads connection, buildings, and you can see, of course, the big contrast between the scale of residential buildings and the scale of commercial and industrial buildings on the east side of the city. Various non-vehicular paved surfaces on the next slide, parking lots and drives, and approximately 46% of the city is covered by impervious surfaces. And a lot of that falls within the floodplain area. So approximately 62% of Brentwood's floodplain is covered by impervious surfaces as well, which of course contributes to various runoff and water quality issues. Another interesting thing, another interesting characteristic of the east side of Brentwood is its location along the Metrolink line, the blue line. And it's basically, the city's essentially served by three Metrolink stations, one of which is in Brentwood. Approximately 15% of the city by land area is located within a quarter-mile or a 5-minute walk of Metrolink. And approximately 30% is located within a half-mile or 10-minute walk. And this begins to get into established residential neighborhoods. And it really suggests the opportunities that need to be considered for transit-oriented development in the future, something that the design guidelines will need to take into account. Again, that physical characteristic on the next slide is reinforced in the existing land use classifications. As you can see, the majority of the city is residential, but there are significant portions of commercial and industrial development, and actually a significant amount of multifamily residential, much more than many kind of inner ring suburbs in St. Louis County feature. And you know, this kind of, I think, goes to show some of the unique aspects of Brentwood. The next map shows analysis that we are doing as part of the overall St. Louis County Comprehensive Plan, looking at county-wide community place types. These are character-based districts. And Brentwood really falls kind of in a unique position relative to much denser kind of traditional neighborhood development, which makes up most of the city and continues to the communities to the east, and then much larger kind of single-family estate homes, which fall on the west side of Brentwood and continue to the northwest of the city. So just again goes to highlight the number of unique residential characters that exist within the city that will have to be accounted for in the design guidelines. The next slide, this is Brentwood's existing zoning classifications. Of particular note here is the Manchester Corridor, or MC District, which currently does feature commercial design guidelines, although there are no other portions of the city that have design guidelines at this point, as you well know. And then looking at a series of kind of the special overlay districts. So of course there's the Manchester Corridor zoning district that we just mentioned, which is along Deer Creek, southeast corner of the city. There are three subdivisions, York Village, Whitehall, and the Park Ridge and Park Ridge Addition, which are along the western side of Brentwood. These subdivisions have indentures or deed restrictions that guide building design currently, but no formalized city architectural design guidelines. And then there are two key focus areas that were called out in the Brentwood 2020 Comprehensive Plan. The Brentwood Town Center Commercial District, which is essentially Brentwood Boulevard from Strassner down to Manchester. And then the West Manchester Commercial Subdistrict, basically all of Manchester that's not under the current Manchester Corridor zoning. And then one of the items that was brought up at the Planning and Zoning Commission was the Hanley Industrial Court. And obviously this is something that was not an original focus of this project, but we have seen through the process so far the necessity for looking at some level of design guidelines for this area as well, particularly given its potential to evolve over time and also its potential for future transit-oriented development. So we've been, throughout this process, continuing to develop and update a list of preliminary issues and opportunities, which I'll run through quickly. So first, no defined checklist for residential submittals. Obviously no design guidelines today, which complicates the work of the ARB. We've heard from you that you do not feel that you're fully empowered to deny projects because there are no defined guidelines. We know that commercial projects are not required to be reviewed by ARB, though they're only reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The current zoning code does not have a floor area ratio limit or any other controls to govern building size other than the setbacks. It's expected that Brentwood will continue to experience teardowns and rebuilds of both commercial and residential properties due to increasing property value. Currently, only replacement in kind and installation of solar panels can be administratively approved by staff for residential projects. Subdivision indentures and deed restrictions are more restrictive, but the city cannot enforce these requirements. We've heard, particularly from the Sustainability Commission, that there's a lack of clear direction about sustainable building systems and site treatments and when and where those can be employed in projects. At the Planning and Zoning Commission, we got some good feedback about the West Manchester corridor and ensuring that development along that corridor responds to the Deer Creek Greenway. The Hanley Industrial Corridor, as previously mentioned, is evolving, will continue to evolve, and needs design guidelines to govern that evolution. Redevelopment and infill development must preserve the established character of Brentwood's neighborhoods, and houses should not have front facades that are dominated by a garage and front yards dominated by a driveway. So for tonight, what we'd like to do is, from the two of you, get additional input on issues related particularly to residential development and issues that you face in terms of design guidelines. Some of these include site strategies, landscaping, stormwater, green infrastructure. When we think of buildings, issues of setback, scale and massing, materials, roof shape, accents and trims, garages and driveways, doors and windows, porches, fences and landscape walls and additions. These are all things that we would, particularly for residential properties, but also potentially for commercial properties, that we would envision the design guidelines addressing. Building and site signage and lighting, again, signage for commercial, lighting for both. Opportunities for transit-oriented development, which would include both commercial mixed-use development and multifamily residential, and any other topics affecting site and building design. So with that, I'll open it up to your input and questions.
And again, just checking, is there anyone online? All right.
Three of us.
You were doing the overlays, particularly with the 3 neighborhoods with indentures.
Yes.
It occurred to me one of the other big land uses in densely inhabited areas is Brentwood Forest.
Yeah.
And that almost feels, I don't know if it's an HOA, I know they're all condominiums,
That was a condo development. I don't know when it was originally development as apartments, and then it became converted to condo development. I don't know the exact date, but it's been a while. So it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of its own thing. It's ruled by the condominium plat. So any changes to that would require, under state law, that the condominium plat be revised to match whatever they want to do. And then that's reviewed at the Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Aldermen.
counts as a commercial property, but it almost feels like its own overlay just for a reductive exercise of what areas were.
Sure. No, I think it's a good point, yes. And I know, I recall at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting last week, there was several folks got up and spoke about issues with decks and not knowing how things were approved and when and all of that. So.
It was definitely, it was on the list for sure. I agree.
And there was a recent incident with a foundation issue. So, I don't know. I could see it being conceivable that the public would be coming to us looking, as they did last meeting, looking for some direction on stuff. So.
Well, and that brings up an interesting issue, and I know we had talked a little bit about this at our first steering committee meeting. But through, through this process, one of the things that we're going to be looking at is actually how these guidelines are administered. And what are your thoughts and what is city staff's thoughts about actually having commercial developments come to ARB as opposed to just residential developments, or obviously having design guidelines that perhaps the Planning and Zoning Commission can administer, but that are more specific, apply some of the same principles that you all deal with on the residential side to commercial or condominium developments.
So just since you're asking, us who are physically present,
Yeah.
I can answer at least for myself, and see if you agree. The existence of the Architecture Review Board and the Planning and Zoning Commission predates my involvement, in either one. So, the reasons they were set up and the sort of vision for those things by the founders, if you want, matter, I think, to the discussion. But as a member of the board of longstanding, like, to me, not to be overly pedantic, but the name of it is Architectural Review Board, right? Not Residential Review Board, right? So my feeling is that, for the protection of the quality, built environment quality of the city, that counts both aspects, right? And if you want to do commercial versus residential, or commercial industrial, whatever however you do it, right, including parks, like, I feel like there's a need for quality across the built environment, and that, and I would say this because I'm an architect, but as an architect, like, I feel like we're in a good position to be able to help do that, right? So I've sort of said from the beginning, I would like us to do commercial as well, and in fact, I think if we're talking about harm prevention in terms of quality of built environment, then the majority of the harm that people would see would be done in the commercial districts, I think, because that's the main driveway people drive through the town, right? And so, public facilities, larger corporate facilities are what people see about your town, right? Unless they go off the streets. So, long way of saying, I would like it if we did that. I think beyond helping get a quorum in the P&Z, we also were brought on, I think, to provide some of that voice in the P&Z. So if that's a duplication of effort, like, the numbers are more on the side of the architects here than they are there, so I get more say here, and therefore I feel like I can have more influence over the positive nature of that. But that's maybe a larger discussion. We have lots of people in the stakeholder list, right? So, and I know some would totally disagree with everything I've just said, like, vehemently, right?
Well, but so, and it's no secret, it's a matter of public record, there was discussion of merging the Architectural Review Board and Planning and Zoning. The opinion that I hold on that is residential review process that we go through for homes, partially because we aren't enabled by a guideline that sets some of the basic parameters. We get fairly granular, and things are fairly flexible because we're dealing with a smaller scope, an individual piece. To some degree, we do have to deal with personal taste. Individual developers, repetitious pieces. I have said out loud before, I don't believe planning and zoning would have the stomach for some of the length of meetings and level of detail that we engage in. It would be breaking out to a site review meeting every month, or two. The question you raised for enforcement, I think, is also very interesting. I do believe, and we do have variable opinions that I'm aware of from public discussion, ranging from, yes, let's have a really finite, granular design standard, to no, we should have nothing. I actually believe the MC district is a good model. That the MC district, with its materiality and quality and some of the other guardrails that it was intended to place around that particular area, seems to be a good model to emulate. There is nothing like that for residential, but we're also not quite as restrictive, because if we're going to come in and tell someone who's building a home, no, you have to do brick, you can't do vinyl siding, that would be a greater percentage of any given project budget by dictating that material. That said, context of the neighborhood, the massing and the materials are the main things we talk about. And historically, Architectural Review Board was formed because the people of Brentwood went to city administration and said, we don't like the garage front homes that are popping up. So that mandate has always been on us. Saying it, as you've said it up there quite accurately, the garage shouldn't be the dominant architectural feature of the home. There is market evidence about resale values, how long things sit on the market, et cetera, for homes that have a better street presence with a front porch rather than just having a garage 20 feet in front of a door tucked way back in the corner. So part of that goes directly to protecting our property values and the character of the neighborhoods. All of those things I think are easily achievable. I believe one of the successes of the Manchester Overlay District has been that people can go look it up and read it before they come here. So being able to have that level of clarity for proposed projects, both commercial and residential, should manage to level set those expectations of quality. And I did not consciously say style. We have not been dictating style.
That note exactly in my phone.
So, you know, trying to keep that premise for what we're doing and helping inform prospective developers, people doing residential additions, et cetera, just to bring that out so that it's a transparent, clear expectation for people that are coming in to work in Brentwood, I think could be to everyone's benefit.
My relatively short, single family residential experience doing projects on the side, I came into a couple of significant cases of this topic, right, just by chance. So one project I did in Chicago area was done in a historic downtown district, Arlington Heights, Illinois. And in addition to having very well-defined design guidelines at that time, they also had even more well-developed historical district guidelines, right? To the point where, it was designed for me, essentially. Like, there was very little I could do, right, I think it turned out fine, but it was very prescriptive, right? And then maybe a notch down from that, I worked in Clayton, and Clayton doesn't necessarily, and so that was an example of style dictated as well as materials, right? The first one, right? The next one was Clayton, and Clayton didn't really dictate style so much, but they were very clear about materials, right? So 30% brick on the side, very much clear, right? So there was another level of restriction, right? And I'm mentioning neighboring communities, and then Webster, I've presented to Webster for a residential house, and they were much looser in terms of guidelines for the house, but far more restrictive on site, right? So, there's a number, you couldn't mess with trees, permeable paving, FAR, all that was very strict in Webster, but the house, we could get away with something, right? So anyway, I mention this because, I think if we're designing guidelines from scratch, which I think we are, then I agree with Matt entirely. I think there's a quality expectation, both of the design and the materials, right? So there's, did somebody actually invest some thought into this thing? That's kind of what I look for, right? And there's opinion in that, but did somebody really take some care with this design, care with the context, care with those things, and is it thoughtfully presented, or is it just, like you said, catalog, projects? And so that's a quality which is hard to define, which is why I think it's important to retain professionals. It won't always be us. It'll be other people in these chairs, to give them some leeway to interpret that, right? But in terms of style, I would personally not like to see, craftsmen only over here and something only over here, In fact, we had a modern house come in. I've talked about this many times. The only modern house I've ever seen was over that way, in the whole time I've been on the board. And it's a nice design. They presented it well. They had clearly thought about what they were doing. The owners loved it, and I was all in for it, right? It was completely different than the houses on the other side, but not in terms of scale, not in terms of quality, those kind of things. So that's one series of thoughts. And then another would be, with all honestly meant due respect to the MC guidelines, we didn't participate in the writing of those. And although it's logical to say we're going to extend those because we already have them, why not extend them, right? I don't know if I don't know if I would want to do that until I knew exactly what it was that they said, because there might be something in there that I wouldn't agree with, right? You know, so I like the notion that we might extend the guidelines because they exist, or at least be influenced by them. But I want to verify their content before I was voting yes.
No,
You know, yeah.
on that topic, completely agree, because even just a recent experience with planning and zoning, the MC guidelines clearly say no concrete block, but it's vague. Where we look at kitchen conservatory, and this was a robust public debate about that material of a decorative concrete block with different patterns and jointing, and it was, I think it was actually a great example of that diversity of point of view, compromising, working with the owner, working with the contractor, working with board members with different expectations.
Oh, I was just going to point out, the MC district does allow for some flexibility. It does say concrete smooth masonry block is not as prohibited, not outright prohibited, but it does say it's not recommended versus other materials. And that's where the distinction is, and where y'all came into play on that discussion. I will also, we probably want to get into the fact, the Planning and Zoning Commission can revert, ask the ARB to review projects, but generally they kind of want to, due to what they have in the design guidelines and how they review projects, they kind of just want to move things forward, and their understanding of the design is, has worked well. So the things also I think this board has talked about, and we want to get into, is what are those things that staff would be able to approve without it coming to the ARB? If it's something off the back of the home, and as long as they're matching specific details, they would like some regulations that would allow for staff approval, is what we've talked about in the past. And they get into, you know, the amount of coping and the trim around the windows to provide more design influences, which is a common discussion that we have at our ARB meetings. So I think those are things that you would like addressed in the design guidelines, yeah.
So to some degree, those types of elements, like, I would like it to be prescriptive and say the windows have to have trim.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not telling you I'm not telling you it's colonial, I'm not telling you it's, you know, shaker flat, such and such, but just a punched window. And then even within that, if somebody came in with an exquisitely detailed modernist home where it was all put together and it was, you know, something a Miesian, lovely, wonderful home, sure, we're gonna take a look at it and like, you're right, we can't put trim on that. But that's almost a unicorn submission. We haven't seen one of those I've been doing this 17 years, so.
I would say if it's a full-on home, that would still require ARB. What would be staff level would be any addition, rear addition.
And
That's not visible from the public right-of-way, is what.
We used to review fences,
Yeah.
decks, all of those things way back in the day, that the ordinance has been revised since then to allow those for staff review. So replacement in kind, absolutely get it. We've talked about like screen porches or small home additions off the back, with the exception of, I would say, it gets a little muddy when we get into like the sunroom companies. The sunroom companies tend to bring in their product and want to literally bolt it onto the back of the homes, and they aren't necessarily thought through. So I would leave discretion for staff there to be able to say something doesn't look right, we need help.
There's,
Oh, please.
I will.
That's
But yeah, so that's an interesting part of this, right? So to Whitney's point, like I you know, every home addition that comes through is not necessarily one that we have much input on, right? And in fact, I find myself a lot of times looking through them and saying, okay, it's a home addition, it's fine, right? You know, because most of the time it's going to be, as you said, it's not visible, or it's, you know, within the footprint of something that used to be there, or everything says match existing anyway, you know, so the level of quality is already pegged to the level of quality already existing. So it's not, we're not asking them to fix the entire thing. That's not part of our purview. So therefore, as long as they're matching the quality of what's there and not impinging on a neighbor, then it's really, I'm okay with it. But there are situations where maybe you can see it, or it's something significant, or it's additional footprint where maybe we need to see it. So I guess what I'm thinking is, there's low hanging fruit, and then there's mid hanging fruit, and then there's high hanging fruit. And I think so relative to the window trim, right? Like, as I've seen it in other jurisdictions where I've been on the other side of the table, like my submission doesn't even get to this forum unless they've checked off the boxes, right? And it's been there's been a series of staff changeovers and things have happened in COVID, and lots of stuff has happened, so it's all in the mix. But since we're looking to do new stuff, I think ideally, it wouldn't even come to us unless it had already been vetted, right? And so because we are fixing a lot of things, in this session that we don't necessarily have to be fixing. They're sometimes beyond the purview of the board, but the problem is glaring, and it's not staff's fault. It's like some people just push stuff on the drawings anyway, right? But I think they shouldn't even be allowed to get to this point unless they've met a series of standards already, right?
Well, so that raises a notion of including, maybe it's not in the design standard, maybe it's an update for the city of examples of complete packages for people to emulate or use as an example. So then let's blend a couple of things. If there is a checklist out there that says window trim minimum 2.5 inches, and I know that as a designer coming in, and that's published and that's an expectation out there on the website, it's in the materials and the manuals, and I've got a modernist design because my client loves Corbusier, and I'm coming in, I can look at Whitney and go, listen, this is not on your checklist. It's going to be different. And you can immediately say, oh, we're going to need to go to the board with this. So again, managing that expectation, setting those rules out there, but completely agree, there are things that come through us if someone's just taking the deck they already have and putting a screen porch on it with a 4 and 12 roof pitch and stained cedar asphalt shingles to match, and a screen door out onto the grass in the backyard. Not a lot there for us to look at. Expedite the process for the homeowners and the contractors. Make it a friendlier process for that market to be able to just have staff review it.
Something else we find, and tell me anyone else if I'm wrong about this observation, but I feel like maybe in the different circles we travel in or in the general public, there's sometimes I've heard, not even just Brentwood people, but I've heard the people express the notion that like the ARB or an ARB is an impediment, right? Like we're sort of in the way of easier development or something, right? And I feel like my experience on the board has been, we're mostly just really helping people. It sounds like a pat on the back to myself, right? But a lot of times, seriously, they come in with like, something that's totally not been thought about. I can't tell you the number of times when someone's come in with something out of a book and there's just been no thought whatsoever. And the client is sitting there with the builder and they're like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That's the first I'm hearing of it, right? This happened multiple times since I've been, and so I feel like, yeah, you should probably know what you're buying, and why are we the ones pointing it out? So it's like I'm happy to do that to help people. I think we help. I don't think we hurt anything or get in the way of anything, right? So, and I think I voted no, twice in 12 years, maybe once, it's like, so I think, the goal is, I think we're helping, not impeding, right? So that's okay, enough of that. I think that we all agree on that. But there is something that can be done at staff level and then it can rise. I agree with that. And we can talk about what exactly that is. Another thought I had was, like the strong move toward bigger and bigger houses that we see, right? So, and everywhere in the town, right? Like it most obvious when you have a one-story neighborhood that we go two-story in, and there's no controls, there's no code, there's nothing in the zoning that says you can't do that, right? And if someone's coming in and they got more money to spend and they want to build a two-story house in a predominantly one-story district, we can lean on context and we can try to tailor that maybe to not be quite as, obvious. But there's not really anything in the zoning that tells them they can't do it, right? And so they could appeal over us and and probably get approved. So, I think we have to somehow take that into account, right? There's a lot of one-story bungalow type neighborhoods in town, which you've driven around and seen, right? And so as things go forward, there's going to be a lot of pressure to increase that scale everywhere in the whole town. And so there's some neighborhoods I think, managed that successfully. I feel pretty good about how we've helped with that. There's others where, it was kind of like, hands tied. I probably don't think it should be 2 stories, but it's going to be, right? And then there's some neighborhoods, especially, I'm thinking of, I won't mention them, but there's a few I've driven through recently, which are so tiny. I can't imagine it going to 2 stories and not blowing everything up, right? So somehow we have to sort that one out. There's a scale versus drive for people wanting more scale.
That's a challenging issue because, and we are dealing with this in a couple of other communities where we're actually doing zoning code updates. And I think there is a natural tendency when those issues are arising, particularly if the community has an architectural review board and has some level of design standards, to try and address the building scale issue through design standards. But as you well know, design guidelines are essentially advisory at the end of the day. They don't have the same force of law that the zoning code has. And so I wonder if actually, if those issues are really critical, maybe it's only in certain neighborhoods, but if there doesn't need to be, if we don't need to rather think about handling that through a potential zoning code amendment as opposed to an architectural design guideline.
And I just mentioned it because, like, oftentimes the very first moment it comes up is when it drops here, right? And it's the first, it's like, you can picture the situation is always the same, right? There's like 20 little houses in a row.
Yep.
And it's that one they want to make big, right? And so it's like
On the smallest lot
on
of the
the,
block.
on the small, yeah. And so it's like, it would, sometimes I think to myself, and again, this is just, we're all in this together, but sometimes I think, oh man, I wish we would have talked about this before, right? Because, go ahead.
And to tie that to part of the earlier conversation, the vast majority of what we're seeing coming before our board are things that were pre-designed and picked out of a catalog. Part of the back of my brain, I am not trying to go get architectural business for all the small architects that are trying to design all these houses. I want to help the builders choose something better out of the catalog. But, we know they buy the same plan. They'll build it 10 times. They'll build it in multiple municipalities. Their guys know how to do it, and they're profitable. Right. I have nothing against that. I want them to pick something that fits in the context, the massing and the materials of the neighborhood they're working in, instead of building something they've built before because they're not thinking about it.
And to have them maybe be, to your point, which I think is valid, and I think is a city service, to have them be forewarned, right?
Yes.
Right. That like, so they're not wasting money going down a rabbit hole, right? So they're forewarned that, yes, you can put that plan book house in this location, but you might have to trim the eaves or something, like, whatever basic things we do to like get it to fit into a smaller density neighborhood, right?
Doesn't need an 18 and 12 roof slope.
Yeah, like you might have to, you might have to amend the trust order that you already put in before you came here, right? There's that kind of thing, So, that's maybe would help us, right? There's one thought I had. I have others. Go ahead.
No, I was done. List by all means.
It's not that long. So you mentioned zoning, and so you mentioned FAR, and it's something that I've broken recorded many times. There's also other things on your list. So there was fences, and so it occurs to me we just did a new fence regulation, like utterly divorced from any other discussion, right? Like it didn't have to do with this, that, it was just fences, right? I'd like to see this design guidelines maybe tie those disparate pieces together. So there's permeable paving, FAR, like height guidelines, setbacks, fences, trees, we don't have any ordinance about trees. Like Webster, don't touch a tree, right? So I think,
And that has come up. There was a gentleman at one of the other meetings asking about a tree. He actually called me back to follow up. But that did raise the issue again, because this board has no control over that. So you can buy a catalog house, plop it down on a lot with zero landscaping, and we can't say anything about that.
Please turn on.
and I think maybe, I understand that point. I understand that point. So the time to maybe have an influence is just during the plan review process, right? Like, so, and as we've said many times, like, you presented it to us, with a nice, grayish, non-offensive design. 2 days later, the painters come in, it's hot pink. Like, all right, cool, right? What am I going to say? That could be true for trees. Like, I don't know, but I think we have, a few points of contact and influence. And one of those, plan approval moment might be, we'd like you to consider, landscaping. And,
Typically how we do it is we give an opinion, could you consider this? It would help X, Y, Z,
or don't chop down like the 500-year-old tree that everyone loves in town, right? It's, so just because you want your garage front to knock it off, right? So that's, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I thought maybe y'all want to get into some other examples. Like I remember you talking about this house to the east of us, about changing the roof slope on the addition so that it matched better with the house, and maybe having that specific in the requirements. Therefore, then if that's done, then staff would approve it. If those are things you want to discuss now, or I just did enough.
So I think the example you're referring to, when, again, a catalog home comes in, they tend to have fairly steep roof pitches, because if you're building in a flat lot, brand new subdivision, people are trying to make their houses look a little grander, where, to Carl's example, if you're the one house in the middle of 21 stories, that height is unnecessarily exacerbating that difference, where it doesn't change the program inside the home at all to drop that roof pitch, lessen the impression, lessen the mass. So is your comment based on being able to have staff review that, or?
Well, there was, like, in an addition, y'all had talked about an example from prior to I coming with the city, was they were doing an addition, and the back end had a 2-story, and it was originally turned to be the opposite direction where the existing home was. So part of the discussion was that how additions are to fit in with the existing home, and that y'all made them turn the design of the addition to match. Is that the kind of detail?
We had them turn the pitch of the roof without changing any of the interior design and function.
Yeah.
It was just an adjustment to the roof line to kind of optimize how it fit in with the neighborhood.
Right. And so those are things I think that would be helpful in the design guidelines to discuss. Yeah.
Well, and I'm not sure the exact example, but I think I know what you mean. Like so for instance, like the additions we said that like are fully behind the house and you just can't see unless you're peeking around the corner. Like, I think, as long, match existing and you're fine, right? But if it's a change to the roof plane in which you can see it, peeking up out of it, that's a change to the house, right? So in that case, like, it's not an addition on its own, it's a change to the entire presence of the house, and I think that would come to us, right? And honestly, frankly, anything that staff was like, I'm a little queasy about this, I think, I'm not trying to put us out of work, right? I think there's still things to do. But yes, I know there's been a couple where like the whole front of the house roof changed to meet this thing, and that I think should come, because that's more sensitive.
Yeah.
There's something I was thinking, but I lost it. Yeah. Oh, I know what it was. Do you have a thing? Yeah. So just going back to the other examples, the extreme example I mentioned, in the historic district, I've seen everything, including, things you might consider planning and zoning, like, you know, what are the because we don't really do the setbacks here, but nevertheless, like, you know, your building is 10 feet out in front of the other two, that comes up, right, you know? So I've had to do drawings that presented in plan, like, how is it working, you know, with the stuff next to me? I've had to do it in elevation. Do I have a datum line, you know, that comes across, you know, the same height as the other houses with their datum lines? You know, even if I'm doing a 3-story house and theirs are all 1, I still have to find a line in my building to help. You know, there's all these ways that I can navigate context that I've been asked to do in other jurisdictions that don't ever come up here, right? And so we bring them up a little bit, but it might be nice for people to know about those thoughts. So the design guidelines, as you've said, maybe everyone said, are as much about guidelines, follow the rules, as they are about, hey, here's some quality things to think about as you're designing your house in our town, right? So
And that's a good, part of what you said, I believe, could be improving the submission guidelines,
Right.
which would be, when you show us your site plan, you have to show both lots on either side with the building line. But then when you crossed over to your elevation is now in a datum of other things, that starts crossing between a submission guideline and a design element. So I think there's a lot of potential there, because what you're hitting on are things that we look at all the time that people should understand. We're going to look at that before they come in.
and they don't know.
Okay. So, Matt, I think it was you that was mentioning the whole issue. Well, I think you were both mentioning in different contexts, but you know that there's, from your perspective, there's not an interest in trying to dictate style of the building. That it's about quality of the design. Are there any specific items that you would not want to see residential guidelines address? Things that the guidelines should be intentionally absent from the guidelines?
That's an interesting question. I don't know how to answer that one off the top of my head.
Okay, well, obviously, someone can think about it, but.
Yeah, something to consider.
Well, you know, for one of the answers is things that staff could do without our involvement, right? You know, so
Okay.
I mean, maybe the guidelines address it, but that's not the right answer. I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer either. We should think about it. It's a good answer, because I think there should be some things, honestly, that maybe we don't have to weigh in on. I think that's a fair question, you know. So I don't know what they are yet, but
Yeah, okay. And obviously, as this progresses, you know, we will make some recommendations along those lines as well. But I didn't know if just in your experience so far, or thinking about this, if you just think like, well, that's like, both as a city appointed official and as a design professional, like, I'm just philosophically opposed to a design guideline dictating X or Y, you know.
well, it
something
is
like
easier to answer if I put myself on the other side of the table again.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So if I put myself back over there, then that's an easier question to answer. And so one thing I'm not going to answer the question yet, but I will say I'm pretty sure that some of that's it's going to be in the sort of vibratory zone there between like context and guidelines, you know. So color comes to mind, right? You know, like, you know, I mean, maybe everything in the neighborhood is beige, but should everything have to be beige? Like, I don't know. That's an interesting question, right? You know.
I was trying to frame that within the board experience of, we work very hard to get to a yes when someone comes in with something.
Yeah.
We want to work within their parameters. We ask them, hey, is it possible to do this? Is that too much of a construction impact, too much of a cost, too much of a schedule impact? Would the owner be in favor of doing this? We tend to get to yes. The places where we hear back negatively from the neighbors and the public tend to be things that can't be legislated. The one that I know we've
Like
had.
color.
No, the one I know we've had twice or more are the 2-story homes Or even an existing two-story home with a new two-story home, and the new two-story home, we hear back that their windows line up exactly with our bedroom window. We feel like they're looking in on us. I don't believe we should ever be mandating your windows lining up with the neighbor's windows next door.
Sure.
Or not lining up.
Right.
And, things like two-story homes where even next to an existing two-story home topography, we've gotten phone calls, they can look down into our room. Live in, as the map on the screen shows, we live in a fairly dense suburban environment that we can't mandate those kind of things.
So I think maybe one of the things that came out of this meeting then is that we're thinking that there's an educational component to this thing as much as there is a guideline component to it, which is a lot to ask. But, even just, a simple, section diagram, showing window and we can't control this. I mean, it could be a plus to suggest that if you're designing a house from scratch, you might take into context that information for your own client, not necessarily for the neighbor, right? But given that they're all coming from books, it's not likely to happen. But I know from the guidelines I have responded to personally, there's an educational component to them as well, right?
A lot to chew on for you. So
It's good, but it's good, very good information, very good information. Anything else?
I mean, still, the massing of the front of the house, we hear a lot of public comment about people not liking the garages, and it's not solicited.
Yeah.
That is a valid public. We hear all the time that people don't like them. And that goes with, as I noted before, market studies on home valuations, benefit of having front porches, neighbors talking and walking dogs, and all of those context pieces.
And I think definitely with the snout versions we're talking about, I think people don't like the garage front houses until they're building their own, in which case they all want a garage front house, right? So that's a tricky thing to navigate, right? They don't want their neighbor to have it, but it was their lot, now they want it now, right? So
I want to park both my cars right off the street in there on days when it's raining.
But I think we've done a good job, again, self-congratulating here, but I think this team, staff, board, we've done a decent job of navigating that, right? We have, I think, improved the quality of the garage front homes that have gone in recent years, right? They don't have the snout anymore, right? But people...
We have talked in the past about that as a function of lot size.
Oh, sure.
And lot coverage. So and one of the fundamental pieces that we understand, back to the educational component, is a lot of the people within Brentwood don't understand that our lots are small.
Right.
So there's an inescapable thing here when you look at the homes that are coming out of the catalogs, what's popular on the market, the drive for the two-car garage, the grocery run, I'm gonna park and just be right next to the kitchen. All of those market forces are valid. We're not trying to squash development. We're trying to improve property values, city experience, et cetera. So we're looking for ways to temper, modify, and improve. We rarely say no to a two-car front unless it's obvious that the lot is big enough that you could put it on the side. We've had a few of those. That the lot is big enough that you can put it behind, because every other house on the street has a garage behind. Why are you the only one that wants to put the garage on the front? You've got a big enough lot, all the neighbors are behind. You should be fitting in with that context.
I'm excited about the potential for the transit-oriented development that you've identified, right? And I know others have talked about it. So to the degree that might fall under commercial or residential, right? It would have a big impact on our town, right? If we started doing more of that. I'm actually hopeful that we do, because I think the Metrolink stops, are a boon for that. It's a different discussion, I guess, but that's a positive thing, I think, to think about.
All right, just checking, any public chimed in? All right, well, we're not done. We got plenty more meetings to talk, so you've got something to chew on from us.
Yes,
so.
sir. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, so that was new business. There's no one in the room, and we just confirmed there's no one online, so we don't have public comments. Building official director report?
We have an application for the May meeting, so mark your calendars.
27th is Memorial Day, so 18th feels about right.
So we do have that application, so if we have any more. And feel free, following this discussion, if you would like Tim to consider anything else, feel free to email them to me, and I can forward them on to Tim. In relation to residential or even commercial, since you're both on P&Z.
Enjoyable conversations. It's design talk.
All right, move to adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Stand adjourned.